SG? So we're going to start. Then the idea. Good evening, everybody. I think we can start now. Thank you all for coming. I know we've had a very long week, and this is Friday, and we have another day of meetings tomorrow, but thank you all for staying on and coming to this very important meeting for the Commonwealth Secretariat. This meeting particularly is our very important event. Some of you might have come to the launch of the Call for Living Lands, our Living Land Charter, which we have launched right now, so we test, which we will then update for when we have to launch it more formally at CHOGM. So this session is talking about addressing climate, biodiversity, and land degradation challenges, which is central to our Living Land Charter. But within that, today we're going to be discussing about one specific key focus, which is on accelerating the uptake of nature-based solutions. For this meeting, we will start with the Secretary General to give her opening keynote. This will be followed by the Prime Minister of Australia is unable to join us today, but instead we have Mr. James Larson, who's the Climate Coordinator and Deputy Secretary at the Department of the Prime Minister's Office in Australia. He will be reading the Prime Minister's speech. So SG, may I request you to go to the lectern, please.
Good evening, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to warmly welcome you all to this event today, hosted in collaboration with the government of Zambia and the government of Namibia. I really am delighted to see those of you who could make it in person amidst the ongoing constraints and efforts to tackle the global health pandemic, which is COVID-19. I'd like to appreciate all the ministers who are here, together with James Larson, who has bravely stepped in to pretend to be Scott Morrison. And as you see, they look very similar. There's the Minister of Green Economy and Environment from Zambia, the Minister of Environment and Forestry and Tourism from Namibia, the Minister of Finance, Economic Planning and Trade from the Seychelles, the Minister for the Climate Change and Special Assistance to the Prime Minister from Pakistan is regrettably not with us because he has had to leave as a matter of emergency, but I know he is with us in spirit. And then we have representatives from Commonwealth member states, our partner organizations, and all other stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen. We know now, beyond peradventure, the need to recognize the vital contribution of nature to human existence and well-being. Many societal changes and challenges are now presented to us, and we are currently facing them boldly and bravely. But they touch on human health, climate change, biodiversity loss, food and water security, and environmental degradation, not just on our land, but in our ocean. And they're all tied to the state and functioning of the natural environment. So multi-impact scenarios, like those the world has experienced over the last 2 years, have unfortunately shown us what happens when this inextricable link is broken. The recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Working Group 1 contribution to the 6th assessment report provides further irrefutable evidence of the immense threats confronting us all, and the 2021 emissions gap report, released just last week, is yet another thundering reminder of the need to act urgently to curb emissions. It's been like another body blow. So I hope we can all agree that we do not need to or have the option to wait for more sobering reminders, and we must deploy an array of sustainable solutions for the benefit of our people and our planet. One approach is through nature-based solutions, which offer a cost-effective way to simultaneously tackle the interlinked climate, biodiversity, and land degradation crisis, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we are striving to adopt blue and green recovery strategies. It is estimated that nature-based solutions can contribute over 30% of the emissions reduction required up to 2030 to limit temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius. And this represents a significant potential that we simply cannot afford to ignore. Within the Commonwealth, member states acknowledged early on the critical importance of healthy natural systems for our well-being. Through the 1989 Langkawi Declaration, Commonwealth heads committed to protecting the natural environment in support of climate action and biodiversity conservation, and this commitment was further reflected in our Commonwealth Charter. Thus, it is no coincidence that as we gather for this momentous conference, amongst our collective goals is adapting to protect our communities and natural habitats and mobilizing the finance to do so. Sadly, although these are two extremely pressing priorities, there are still numerous challenges with accessing the finance to implement solutions that harness the power of nature. Some of the barriers in drawing down funding include the need for, firstly, an understanding, a common understanding and measurement of meaningful nature-based interventions, increased private sector engagement, better mainstreaming of nature-based solutions, and designing effective pipeline projects and investments that can attract funding. In recognition of this, the Commonwealth Secretariat, under the proposed Commonwealth Call to Action on Living Lands and utilising its successful, tried and tested Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which has already supported our member states to mobilise more than $44 million of climate finance, including for nature-based initiatives, will continue to support member states to access all sources of funding to implement and scale up nature-based solutions for targeted and synergistic action across the 3 Rio Conventions. But as I pause to think about that, I wonder how much more we would achieve if every single member state who would wish to have a climate finance advisor actually had one. We have 32 small states in our member states, in our Commonwealth. What a difference that would make. And this support that we are currently giving includes providing the technical assistance for the development of robust project pipelines that can secure climate finance. And building on this support, another important element is overcoming the financial barriers for such interventions is sharing successful examples and experiences that we can learn from. So it's not just what works, but actually identifying what does not. And in this vein, the Commonwealth Secretariat, through the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, has recently released a discussion paper entitled Accelerating Financing for Nature-Based Solutions to Support Action Across the Rio Conventions, Examples from the Commonwealth. The paper highlights options of innovative financial mechanisms that can leverage the much-needed private sector investments for nature and shares examples where Commonwealth countries have been able to employ such mechanisms and also secure climate finance for projects related to the nature-based solutions. And as we continue to work together for better access to funding for our member states, we equally cannot fail to acknowledge the importance of developed countries continuing to honour their commitments and pledges to deliver the finances and assistance required to adequately deal with the immense task of climate change, biodiversity, loss and land degradation. Only about 2% of climate finance goes to small island developing states. And likewise, only about 2% goes to ocean-related projects. And of course, our small island states are actually big blue ocean states. So it really is imperative that all sources of funding and innovative mechanisms are made available and utilised to channel funding to scale to enable Commonwealth member states to fully implement the high-quality natural solutions. So indeed, as we adapt and evolve to tackle unprecedented global issues, the spirit of cooperation and partnership has never been more important. We must work faster, smarter, and together to connect, innovate, and transform to deliver a common and sustainable future. Thus, I call upon all of us present, other partners, stakeholders, and the private sector to continue to implement, finance, and significantly scale up meaningful nature-based interventions as part of our armour against climate change, and as we make the transformational shift towards a low-carbon climate and nature-resilient future. And with these remarks, I really want to thank you for your remarkable attendance and all the things that you have already done. But I want to thank you, if I may, in advance for all the things that you will do as a result of having been here together with us in the future. And I really look forward to engaging and fruitful event. And may I say a special thank you to Australia, because some of you may not know that Australia was in fact the first country to give us money to set up our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. And without that contribution and the later contribution that we received from the United Kingdom, we would not be able to be celebrating. Now, I know that James is a very powerful man, so let's see what he's going to do to help us further. Thank you.
Thank you, SG, for setting the scene and summarizing what it is and our commitment, and also challenging the partners who are here with us today. With that, I now invite Mr. James Larson, who's the climate coordinator, as well as the Deputy Secretary at the Department of the Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you, Secretary General, and thank you, Secretary General, for acknowledging the role of Australia in this space, in the Commonwealth. I appreciate very much the opportunity to make some remarks on behalf of the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison. As you know, he left on Tuesday evening. Australians understand and support the need to take action on climate change and to get to net zero by 2050. And we've got a plan to do it. Nature-based solutions are an essential part of this. They bring layered benefits, not just in helping us reach net zero by 2050, but in boosting agricultural productivity, protecting biodiversity, and supporting communities and jobs. For instance, we know that restoring vegetation on farms can improve soil health, preventing erosion and driving better yields while protecting biodiversity and sequestering carbon. That's why we are trialling a market-based mechanism in Australia to reward farmers for increasing biodiversity as well as reducing emissions. This mechanism will build on and complement the Australian government's flagship Emissions Reduction Fund. That fund provides our farmers, Indigenous communities, industries and businesses with critical support by backing on-the-ground, practical projects to reduce their emissions. And the fund continues to grow with 1,000 different projects participating in the broader fund, most of this linked to land and agriculture sector projects. Together, these projects are generating hundreds of millions of tonnes of emissions reductions for Australia, with over 200 million tonnes contracted so far. As the largest island on Earth, we also want our very extensive mangrove and seagrass ecosystems to play their full role as carbon sinks. Australia is fully committed to building the health and resilience of the ocean, including investing an additional $100 million this year in ocean leadership action. Right now, some 29% of Australia's land and ocean is protected, putting us on track to make a strong contribution to the global target of 30% of the world's land and 30% of the world's ocean by 2030. Australia was delighted to join the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, and we acknowledge the United States and the United Arab Emirates for their leadership on this important mission. We're also partnering with our Pacific family to improve food security and sustainability through climate resilience. Australia has updated its National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy and submitted an adaptation communication to the UNFCCC ahead of COP26. At this COP26 meeting, the Prime Minister announced that we are increasing our 2020 to 2025 climate finance to $2 billion Australian dollars to support mitigation and adaptation efforts in our region. This doubles Australia's previous $1 billion pledge over the 2015 to 2020 period, and will see at least $700 million flowing to meet the Pacific's needs. In the past, over 70% of Australia's bilateral and regional climate finance has focused on climate resilience and adaptation. A big part of this is nature-based solutions. And we will continue that focus as it reflects a key priority for our region. Australia has a record that we are proud of when it comes to nature-based solutions and the 3 Rio Conventions. Of course, COP26 is the big focus right now, but we are also pleased to be taking an active role in negotiating a post-2020 global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Australia looks forward to deepening partnerships through these conventions so that together we can lift our collective ambitions through nature-based solutions, and we look forward to drawing on our expertise in our domestic programs and processes to sharing those with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. We thank you also that, as SG mentioned, you were the first country to support the Climate Finance Access Hub, but we also thank Australia as the largest island. We thank for all the support, the partnership that we have in advocating the needs of small states, as well as supporting the needs of small states, particularly with this work in the Pacific Island states. So we thank you very much, and we look forward to working more closely with you as we go forward in enhancing these programs. We now have Honorable Minister Flavien Joubert. He's the Minister for Agriculture, Climate Change and Environment of the Seychelles. He has to leave shortly after his speech, so he has something else to do, but Mr. Flavien, over to you.
Thank you, facilitator, Madam. I will present this intervention on behalf of the Minister for Finance, Mr. Hassan, who unfortunately is not able to be present for this session this afternoon. The Right Honourable Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Honourable Scott Morrison, MP, Prime Minister of Australia, Honourable Ministers from Zambia, Namibia, and also Pakistan, High Commissioner of the Republic of Namibia to the UK, senior officers and staff of the Commonwealth Secretariat, discussion panelists, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. I would like to start by thanking the Commonwealth, through the Secretary General, for ensuring that as from 2020, Seychelles finally has a climate advisor. This is the kind of support we need, and it is the kind of support that would really help us make progress on our climate commitments. So, distinguished guests, I am honored and privileged to be invited to provide Seychelles' country perspective on accelerating climate finance for nature-based solutions, climate, land, and biodiversity targets, a crucial topic for our island nation that we in Seychelles need to increase our food sovereignty, whilst at the same time protect, maintain, and restore the pristine state of the biodiversity of our lands, coast, and ocean. As you may be aware, our plethora of natural resources from reach to reef supports two mainstays of our economy, namely fisheries and tourism. Thus, as the Minister for Finance, which I am not, I'm the Minister for Agriculture, Climate Change and Energy, the impact of climate change on the above sectors is a concern of mine. So even if I'm not the Minister of Finance, it is a great concern for me, and I am equally concerned as the Minister for Finance has written. Despite Seychelles being a big ocean state, it welcomes the recent launch of the Commonwealth Call for Action on Living Lands. This is because of the significant impact of upstream land activities on our downstream coastal and marine ecosystems. To date, Seychelles has been piloting a number of nature-based solutions through projects funded by the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environment Facility, and the World Bank. These have demonstrated how simple, low-cost ecosystem approaches can effectively help us to increase our climate resilience and meet our biodiversity targets through sustainable land management practices. Seychelles has also been looking at blended finance to address climate and ecosystem initiatives. I'm sure that you have heard through the different sessions in this conference how this is being done by Seychelles and also its partners. The question now is, how do we scale this up? How do we ensure that long-term, sustainable, and predictable finance is available to enable us to reach our goals under the SDG, under climate, and also under biodiversity agreements? So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to this afternoon's much-needed deliberations on advancing innovative climate finance instruments and mechanisms for nature-based solutions to achieve climate, biodiversity, and land degradation neutrality targets. I would like to thank you, and I wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Jouet. We are actually in partnership with Seychelles because we have an advisor located in Seychelles working with the government on the Climate Finance Access Hub, through which we are developing several bankable projects. We now move on to Honorable Minister Colin Sinzovo. He's the Minister for Green Economy and Environment of Zambia. Minister.
Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Madam Patricia Scotland, Your Excellencies present here, the Prime Minister, Minister Pohamba from Namibia, ladies and gentlemen. When I was asked to come here, I asked for what the event was all about. And then they sent me this note, very interesting one, entitled Accelerating, please mark the word, Accelerating Climate Finance Access for Nature-Based Solutions to Support Climate, Land, and Biodiversity Targets. I say let's underline the word accelerating because I think all of us here have agreed that we are living in borrowed time, that the targets we've set ourselves may not even be met, that the emissions, the ambitions must increase, that we need financing, especially for us, the least developed countries, that if we do not do this, there will be disastrous consequences. Therefore, the word accelerating should really come into place. But what is accelerating? How quickly, Secretary General, Minister Pohamba, and Your Excellencies, do we put these funds on the table? Technical-wise, we agreed. Secretary General and Minister Pohamba and Your Excellency here, Prime Minister, the question is, when I go back to Zambia, what do I tell my people? They are looking for solutions, nature-based solutions. The call really from us is to our partners. Our partners must be serious with their pledges, both in terms of financing as well as in terms of their commitments, in terms of their ambition. I therefore call upon other partners, other countries in Africa, other countries in the Caribbean, the least developed countries, to come together and form a common goal, a common coalition, a common partnership. Because it's only when we are together that these partnerships can work and work quickly. It's only when we are a body together that we can speak with a strong voice. Zambia is ripe for investment, ladies and gentlemen, because we have over 40 million hectares of land. In that area, opportunities for investments are immense, green investments. So we call upon you that as we ensure that our NDCs are met, this results into proper mitigation and adaptation measures. This actually speaks to the development, the very development of the country. We have the Lukanga swamps, for example, which is one of the 3 case studies of nature-based solutions under WWF's Blue Heart of Africa initiative, the other cases being in Kenya and Rwanda. So to maintain the highest productive capacity of our swamps despite climate change, we hope to develop conservation plans for our swamps and use the nature-based solution as the main anchor to mobilize local and international capacity and finance to implement a holistic landscape-level conservation and resilience building programs around all our swamps that will include the following: massive restoration of degraded wetland areas and forests, and this spill over to other countries, and really this is the core for partnerships. Implementation of sustainable livelihood programs. As you are aware, Zambia depends on the natural resources. The same natural resources we have been encouraged to keep are the natural resources we have only for our development. Catalyzing private sector-led water and land stewardship through green and backable investments and certified environmental standards of doing business in working wetlands. Again, it's capacity building. We ask for technical support, and we need technical support like yesterday. We come here for finance requests, but obviously we are required to come up with bankable documents. We need technical expertise. Streamlined land use and wildlife management. Strengthened water resource management and sanitation infrastructure projects. Creation of a special purpose vehicle to manage the nature-based plans and related investments. So we are currently developing the conservation plan for Lukanga swamps, as I said, and we can only call upon the partners to help us in this direction. So there are two of the mitigation programs in our NDCs very well aligned with our natural-based solutions, and these are sustainable forest management as well as conservation agriculture. You will note that forests and agriculture for Zambia are the two major contributors of greenhouse gas emissions, and yet these anchor our economy. So for us, mitigation and adaptation really zero down to our economic development. So the main advantage we have here is that both our mitigation programs listed above have immense adaptation core benefits, meaning we are simultaneously adapting as we mitigate. All the adaptation programs in our NDC align very well with nature-based solutions, and they too are ripe for investment. So we have adaptation of strategic productive systems, meaning agriculture, wildlife, and water, adaptation of strategic infrastructure and health systems, enhanced capacity building, research, technology transfer, and finance for adaptation. Ladies and gentlemen, I therefore urge you, all the potential investors in the Commonwealth, public or private, to join hands with the government of the Republic of Zambia in delivering large-scale nature-based projects. For us, the core is really to accelerate that which we've committed to doing. Again, we are all agreed here that something has to be done, that the catastrophe we face in the near future is human-caused, and that the world, the whole world, has capacity and resources to reverse this trend. We therefore call upon all of us to ensure that we do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Nzovo. Just recently this afternoon, we had a conversation with the minister, and he came and said he's having sleepless nights because, as he just said, he needs the support yesterday for his country. So we said to him, Minister, we wanted to deliver yesterday. So let's hope that this COP will unlock the financing that is needed so that we can deliver for our countries much needed support. And that's, I think, the most important thing with all the commitments that are being made at COP26. We also have an advisor in Zambia, and we introduced the advisor to the minister, and it shows his commitment when he said that he will go to the airport to receive him because due to lockdown, he hasn't been able to travel there yet. So, Minister, we thank you for your commitment and your support, and we are there with you and working with all partners. We promise you that we will be accelerating delivery. We next have the Minister for Environment, Forestry and Tourism from Namibia, Minister Honorable Mohamba Shafeta. Minister, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, Ms. Patricia Scotland, Secretary General of the Commonwealth, fellow ministers, I recognize Mr. Barbuda from Zambia, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, in your, as per your title and respective qualities. Namibia ratified the 3 Rio Conventions, namely the United Nations Convention, Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1995, and the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity and the United Nations Convention to Combat Certification in 1997, respectively. Since then, Namibia has embraced the concept of implementing the 3 Rio Convention in its synergetic approach to promote sustainable land management, build resilience of communities against climate change, and conserve biodiversity. Namibia has so far accumulated significant knowledge and experiences from the ongoing projects and initiatives that can be scaled up to build resilience of communities and ecosystems. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Tourism is currently implementing a 6-year green global environmental facility funded project through United Nations Development Program titled Namibia Integrated Landscape Approach for Enhancing Livelihoods and Environmental Governance to Eradicate Poverty. This project is intended to reduce poverty through sustainable nature-based livelihood strategies that also promote the protection of biodiversity, restoration of forests as carbon sinks, and they contribute to avoiding, reducing, and reversing land degradation. Furthermore, the ministry is also implementing a 5-year Green Climate Fund funded project titled Building Resilience of Communities Living in Landscapes Threatened Under Climate Change through an ecosystem-based adaptation approach. This project aims to increase climate change resilience of productive degraded landscapes in Namibia through the implementation of ecosystem-based adaptation actions that strengthen socio-ecological systems to sustain livelihoods at local level and facilitate value chains associated with natural resources. Our national strategies in Namibia and our action plans are developed in a synergetic way, taking into consideration the objectives of all the 3 Rio Conventions, leveraging on areas of commonalities, shared human and financial resources, and also reinforcing each other at institutional and the programming policy levels. With that, let me once again thank you for your humble attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And thank you for highlighting how you're working in synergetic way, because one thing we're learning increasingly how important it is for us to coordinate and work together as partners. I think we won't have an opportunity to speak to the Secretary General or the ministers here, so I might take the chance. If you keep your questions brief, I can take 2 or 3 questions. If you'd like to ask a question, there's a mic in the middle. You can come up to the mic and ask your question. If you raise your hands, I will see who I spot first, if you would like to. Man in the red shirt, please.
Sorry, can I ask 2 points of clarification, please? First point is, what proportion of the finance is unrequited gifts, grants, and what proportion is interest-bearing loans? And the second point of clarification, can I ask, what is the project evaluation processes that have been undertaken to ensure that they're economically sustainable projects, both at a project level and a macroeconomic level? Thank you.
The second question is from the lady right at the back. I saw her first. Yes, please find a mic and get your question.
Hi, this is my question regarding Australia's support for the initiative. I was wondering if you could expand in terms of how are you looking to replicate what is being done domestically for nature-based solutions, considering issues around Australia's emissions reductions fund, and how to ensure that this integrity is maintained. Because I think there was a recent report by the Australia Institute that looked at land clearing permits and how efficient they were, considering avoided deforestation as a method and so on. Just to clarify, I'm Aruna Chandrasekhar from Carbon Brief.
Thank you. I saw a hand go up right in the front. Sorry, I didn't see you before. So would you like to go next? The lady right in the front. There's a mic right here. If you keep your question brief, then I can squeeze in one more question from the gentleman at the back. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. My name is Anachila Lankombo. I come from Zambia and I work for the Worldwide Fund for Nature there. In different sessions around climate, around this COP, one of the running themes is that there's a lot of climate financing available globally. However, it's difficult for communities and ecosystems that need it to access it. So my question is to the Commonwealth in terms of what is being done at an advocacy level to change that, because we've established the agency of the moment, but there is still difficulties and significant barriers for communities and ecosystems that need this, that can use this available funding to access it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Last question.
Thanks for the opportunity. I have a quick question. So have you explored the role of digital finance in accelerating finance access, and specifically microfinancing?
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a quick response from the Secretary General, and then I will pass on to, yeah, SG?
The first thing to say is that the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub has worked solidly with the Green Fund and others to make sure that the projects that we put forward are both sustainable, regenerative, and will deliver long-term benefits. And so when we are putting these applications together, we have had the benefit of some of the most innovative and challenging successful processes. And in the next session, Uni Krishnan, who is the head of our Climate Finance Access team, will be taking you through the nature of the process that we have adopted. And so I think the next question was in relation to how are we going to guarantee that these applications are actually made. Well, of course, the Commonwealth Secretariat are heavily dependent on the monies given to us, primarily by our member states. And when we created the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, it was to respond to an identified need which has been expressed in this room, namely that the funds are purportedly there, but many of our member states and others could not get access to them because they didn't have the knowledge, the acuity, the capacity to put forward applications in a way in which they were likely to succeed. So one of the things that we've been able to do during the last 3 years is to really identify what a bankable project looks like and to be able to share and transfer that information to our member states. Now, our hope and aspiration would be to encourage funders, which are including our member states, to increase the amount of funds coming to our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub to enable each country who would like to have a climate finance advisor to have that. And I'm very pleased that a number of our countries who've been thirsting for this help are now able to receive it. But really, the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub has been able to prove the purpose for which it was founded, and it was, if you like, a trial to see whether this process was actually efficacious and it would work, to have the hubs and spokes method. And I think if you look at the fact that we have only received, on an experimental basis, 1.5 million, to have delivered already $44 million worth of projects with 762 million in the pipeline, that's not a bad return. And we hope that as we share the information and the data, it will encourage more people to come and support us and more entities. And so we're very happy if foundations, if business and others want to make contributions to this, because we think that it'll make a huge difference. In terms of digitalization, I hope some of you will look at the work we've done on our connectivity agenda. These are detailed questions which I would love to spend longer exploring with you, but I know that time is short. But Uni and the team are going to be here, and the next session will really involve the detailed questions and answers to those questions in a way that will make better sense. I think those are the two main questions for me, and I know that others will be picking it up.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Larsen to quickly respond to the Australia question, and also in the context of the probability of finance, loans, grants, anything you can add as partnering.
So let me, thank you, moderator, very much. Let me go quickly to the first question, which had to do with the extent to which the balance between, was it loans or grants? And so in my remarks, or the Prime Minister's remarks that I conveyed, I provided the statistic that some 70% of Australian climate finance goes to adaptation. That the vast bulk of that are in the form of grants. Australia is looking at finance into the future in a variety of different ways, but to date, the program has very principally been a grants-based program. On the second question, and I thank you for it, yes, of course, land clearance issues have played a part in Australia's record and the data which supports our position in relation to emissions reduction. But of course, the question of nature-based solutions goes far, far beyond, I think, that, and if you look at where Australia is currently positioned, for example, our National Resilience Communique, Resilience and Adaptation Communique. Of course, it is principally domestically focused, as you would expect, but it quite explicitly includes a component which addresses regional needs and interests and contemplates greater collaboration, including in relation to nature-based solutions as means of addressing these challenges. Australia earlier this year announced the establishment or the development of a high-integrity regional carbon crediting scheme. That obviously will be very much based on nature-based solutions. The Oceans Leadership Package that I referred to in the Prime Minister's remarks, some 30% of that is devoted to blue carbon and related initiatives, and we see those initiatives very much having a regional component outside of Australia's borders. And then, of course, when you look at the work that's being done in the Australian agricultural sector, carbon sequestration in soils, and other related work, biodiversity work in Australia, that, of course, is critical for our own domestic performance, but has a very real relevance, I think, to what we do with our international partners, and it does provide a model for international collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen. Just to add to what he said, at the moment it's all access to public finance, public climate finance. We're also exploring, especially now when there's greater momentum from private sector, we will also be exploring opportunities with private funding for these projects. Just to answer briefly the question on digital finance, We are beginning to work on credit swaps for climate, but microfinance, not yet in terms of as a funding source, not yet, but private is a big first start, and then we'll see where microfinance comes up. Because venture capitals, we're just getting introduced to some of them, and we'll see where it goes. I'm sorry we don't have time for bringing in the minister from Zambia, but just to say community-based solutions, especially for this topic of nature-based solutions. Without the communities, we can't do anything. They are central to work on these issues, which are important, because what we want to do is to protect, and it is for the community, for the people. So also, we want to engage with young people to be the center of all the programs that we do, mainstream that so that they lead us from the front. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't take any more or expand any more, but thanks to all the panelists, SG, Mr. Larson, ministers. And with this, I now hand you over to the moderator for the next session, Mr. Amin Idris Adaun. He's the Director, Programs Management and Delivery, AUDA NEPAD. And I hand you over to Unni Krishnan, who's the head of, and he'll expand more on Ms. Larson. Well,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers, dear panelists, all protocol observed. I will start immediately this panel session, which is about advancing innovative climate financing instruments and mechanisms for nature-based solutions to achieve climate biodiversity and land degradation neutrality targets. My name is Amin Idris Adoum, and I'm the Director for Program Delivery and Coordination at the African Union Development Agency. But before we start this panel, there is a quick presentation by Mr. Nair about promoting nature-based solutions to climate change as an integral part of broader adaptation and mitigation plans and strategy, Commonwealth call to action. Mr. Nair? You can actually start, then I have my panelists. I would just maybe invite them to join, then you can quickly do a representation. Dr. Arshi Rastogi, he's the evaluation advisor at interim at the Independent Evaluation Unit at the Green Climate Fund. Mr. Arshi, can you join me, please? Then we have Dr. Alhamdou Dorsuma, who is the Acting Director for Climate Change and Green Growth at the African Development Bank. Dr. Dorsuma, please, can you join us? We have Mrs. Nkomba, Country Director at the WWF Zambia, please. We have as well Mrs. Kampeta Pichet Sayinzoga, CEO, Development Bank of Rwanda. Would you like to join us, please? And finally, we have Mr. Jokswar, CEO Badut, Acting Director for Environment Officer in Charge, Department of Climate Change at Mauritius. Please join us as well. So we have all the members of the panel ready. So we can move for the quick presentation by Mr. Nair, Head of Climate Section at the Commonwealth Secretariat. Mr. Nair, please.
Thank you, Moderator. Respected Secretary General, Honorable Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great opportunity to present before you the Commonwealth Call for Action for Living Lands. So it's just an introductory presentation, and it was initially for 5 minutes, so we'll have to wrap up in a quick. The work stream on land and climate change got momentum following the IPCC special report on climate change and land, which was published in the year 2019. And following that momentum in COP25 and ongoing discussions, we came up with the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter to look at the major sectors within the economy which are impacted by climate change as well as contributing to the climate change. So what is the salient features of the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter? The proposed charter will serve as an agreement by the 54 Commonwealth member countries to work in partnership towards sustainable land management by integrating the targets of the 3 Rio Conventions. So that's, in short, the essence of the initiative. In a nutshell, to bring the strategies of the call for living lands, so the Commonwealth member countries, as some of the ministers indicated, are all signed up to the 3 Rio Conventions, the UNFCCC, the UNCCD, and the UNCBD, and to look at the cross-cutting thematic areas which are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Sorry, the slides are just moving. So which includes sustainable agriculture for food security, sustainable green cover and biodiversity, soil and water management, the effects of animal husbandry and livestock, and of course, indigenous knowledge. Within these thematic areas, which are highly impacted by climate change and which also contribute to the impacts of climate change, we'd like to have implementation strategies following evidence-based, of course, for financing and capacity building, knowledge sharing, and of course, the use of technology. Thus, following a 5x5 approach that'll support the implementation of many of the targets set under the nationally determined contributions, as well as biodiversity and land degradation neutrality. So how do we do it? So this will be done with the Commonwealth established platforms and processes and mechanisms, and of course in partnership with many of the lead institutions in this area. So this is in a nutshell what we would intend to do under the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter. So as all of you know, when we look at nature-based solutions, we see a lot of linkages and feedback loop among the desertification, climate change, and biodiversity loss. And of course, that is significant. It's significant that we need to have integrated solutions when we move forward with nature-based solutions. So how do we implement the Commonwealth Living Lands Charter? So this will be implemented with 5 important implementation strategies with 5 thematic areas. And of course, by constituting thematic technical groups that will work in coordination with the Commonwealth Secretariat, the Rio Convention, and also the regional centers and other thematic areas. So we did consultations with more than 30 member countries and other partner organizations. So these are some of the reflections that we got from the member countries, that the areas of support that they require. Moving forward, the call work stream will be supported, as discussed by the Secretary General, as indicated by the Secretary General, with the established Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. So we'll be working with the 3 funding mechanisms or more, which are working with the 3 conventions, which work with the 3 conventions, which is the GEF, the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund, and of course the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and others. And of course, as private sector is an important area of finance that is growing, we'll also look at private sector as a source of financing when it comes to nature-based solutions. So regarding the consultations, we did consultations, as I said, with more than 30 member countries, and including the Commonwealth accredited organizations, which is a great strength for the Commonwealth, and of course the 3 Rio Conventions. And we also did undertake regional high-level engagements in terms of engaging with the regional expertise, including the African region, Caribbean, as well as with the, and we will be now soon taking up with Pacific as well as the Asian region. So these are some of the reflections of the high-level event that we organized with the United Nations General Assembly, and of course, some of the regional consultations that we followed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nair. And unfortunately, we don't really have much time actually left. We have about, I would say, even 9 minutes. So we're going to make it actually very short. I will start directly by my first panelist, Dr. Arshi. from the GCF Independent Evaluation Office. In your experience as an independent evaluation office, what do you think is needed for countries to access climate financing at scale for addressing the challenge of the challenge on the ground actually related to climate change? In fact, your question would help to answer to the question asked by the minister from Zambia, who was asking, how do you put money on the table? Mr. Arshi, please.
Thank you, moderator, for that question. And that's an important question that my unit, the Independent Evaluation Unit, tries to address in several evaluations that we've done. I just want to, for the sake of time, I'll just make two very specific points. So the name of private sector has come up very often in this afternoon. And we did an evaluation of the private sector approach of the GCF recently, and we found that there is a bit of, the GCF does not make the distinction necessarily between catalyzing on the one hand and mobilizing on the other. And we are recommending that the GCF needs to focus on catalyzing, which might mean taking risks in the short term, which might mean more support through grant instruments and support for policy, not necessarily through private sector directly, but creating the conditions that so that private sector can then come in to contexts and geographies where it otherwise would not come. The second finding that we find across a lot of our evaluations is the challenge of capacity. Access to GCF is through accredited entities. Very often we find that entities, even once they get accredited, find it challenging to then write proposals that are then acceptable to the GCF for want of many things. One is capacity. Many entities have 2 to 5 staff, which is too few. Lack of data, which we'll speak about in an event later, next week, and just human capacity as well. So those are challenges that we keep, that we found, and we stress to the board and make recommendations to the board to consider to tailor the approaches that are fit for SIDS and LDCs in particular, and vulnerable countries in particular.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arshi Rastogi. In fact, it's a process, but it's a process that actually requires a lot of capacity. And let's move directly to Mr. Alhamdou Dorsuma from the African Development Bank, the AFDB. He's the Acting Director for Climate Change and Green Growth. Dr. Dorsuma, can you tell us about the climate finance windows that the African Development Bank has developed, and give us, well, to the audience some real examples of the kind of projects that can access the financing? And your response would also help addressing the question that was asked by the minister, Honorable Minister from Zambia. You have like 1.5 minutes, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderator, and thanks for the organizers for inviting the African Development Bank to this very important panel discussion. To respond straight to your question, let me first say that the African Development Bank over the last 10 years has significantly increased its climate finance resources to African countries. As you all know, Africa is the most vulnerable region in the world in terms of climate impacts, despite being the least contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, Africa is a region where climate finance is not flowing very well. As I speak, Africa last year received only 3% of global climate finance. Actually, out of the 632 billion climate finance that flowed last year, Africa received only 20 billion. Out of the 20 billion, 2 billion was mobilized domestically. So it shows you the importance of climate finance for that continent. And as the first financial institution in Africa, we have increased our climate finance since over the last 5 years, for instance. Since the entry into force of the Paris Agreement in 2016, we mobilized about 12.3 billion as climate finance in various sectors, renewable energy programs, climate smart agricultural programs, as well as climate resilient infrastructure. Let me also mention that we have set for ourselves very ambitious targets. Actually, the African Development Bank has set a target of allocating 40% of its annual investments as climate finance, at least 40%. And in 2016, we were at 9%. So we moved that target from 9% to 35% in 2019. Last year, despite the COVID situation, we were able to achieve 34%, and we are on track to meet the 40% target this year. And moving forward, we are aiming to mobilize 25 billion as climate finance up to 2025. Now, coming to the second part of your question relating to the concrete examples, we have recently established an important program. We call it Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAP, together with the Global Center on Adaptation, with the aim to mobilize 25 billion as climate finance for adaptation. As I said earlier, adaptation is Africa's priority, and this is where all of our member countries are expecting us to play a critical role, and we have prioritized adaptation in our portfolio. Actually, our share of adaptation into our climate finance resources is bigger than the share of mitigation finance. This actually, we are actually the only MDB that is able to achieve the parity target between adaptation and mitigation. Last year, for instance, 63% of our climate finance was allocated to mitigation. Now, on the question about how to bring on the table resources, I think FDB we have two windows of climate finance resources. The first one is our own internal windows. We have our internal funds, like the Africa Development Fund. We do have also some thematic funds on climate change, including the Africa Climate Change Fund. We also have a fund for assisting national and regional climate centers in Africa in order to strengthen their capacities. We call it ClimDev Special Fund. We also are an implementing entity of global funds like the Green Climate Fund, but also the Global Environment Facility, the Climate Investment Funds, as well as the Adaptation Funds. With that, we are able to really mobilize resources and also help our member countries to get direct access to resources by building their capacity. We are currently taking an important role in delivering the readiness program of the GCF in order to build the capacities of African countries to get direct access. Because as you know, countries have very serious capacity issues in terms of getting ready or getting accredited with those funds. So as I speak, there is an event that is going on in the the Africa Pavilion right around the corner on the importance of green banks and national climate change funds in Africa. We are creating a facility to help institutions to get access to those resources in order to deploy them in this very specific and impactful project in their respective countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dosuma. As a matter of fact, the main issue still is the issue of capacity. But we have here with us Mrs. Nkombo, who is the country director for Zambia for WWF, and WWF actually have a great experience on the ground on building capacities of communities. So can you share with us one or two quick examples about how have you been doing actually to build capacities of communities to access to the climate financing? Thank you.
Thank you so much, moderator. I must say that WWF, as you all know, we work in communities and places where livelihoods and economies depend a lot on nature. And over the years, we've seen a rapid decline of nature. It's the same communities also that are severely affected by climate change, and it's the same communities that are not receiving the financing that we are talking about today. So over the years, we've drawn on some of our experiences on the ground, and one of the key lessons that we have gained over the years is that building capacities of local communities is a long game. We have used a combination of approaches for us to invest in building the capacities of communities to receive more support to build around their resilience activities. So we have supported communities through grant financing, basically to strengthen the institutional capacities for them to manage funding and also deliver adaptation and mitigation programs on the ground. We've also most recently been working at the landscape level to support big users of biodiversity and also what that are impacted by climate change to develop green bankable projects. So part of our work has been to support, provide the technical capacity to deliver the bankable projects. However, we've also learned that most of the smaller farmers and the smaller businesses, again, do not have that capacity. So last month, we actually launched a new fund that is looking at the smaller category of enterprises and farmers to incentivize them for them to make the green transitions, but basically having a bank that has subscribed to green principles and have agreed to advance funding on a commitment from the farmers, from the small businesses, that they're going to work towards green outcomes. And when they deliver those green outcomes, then our fund also makes more funding available for them to do what they do. We've also worked with some anchor companies, especially in the agriculture sector, that are managing outgrower schemes. And through them, again, we're creating special funds where the capacity of the anchor company can be utilized to make the funding for adaptation available for smallholder farmers. Yeah.
I would like to thank you, actually, Mrs. Nkombo. And you mentioned actually a bank. And I have just next to me, Madame Kampeta, who is the CEO of Development Bank of Rwanda. Mrs. Kampeta, can you share with the audience one real example on how the Development Bank of Rwanda has enabled financing for nature-based solutions on the ground in Rwanda? Then I'll give you like 1 minute and a half, then 1 minute and a half, because we have only 4 minutes left, and I have 30 seconds to close the session.
Okay,
Please.
Thank you very much. If I have 1 minute and a half, then I'll use it to elaborate on what I think is key if we want the private sector of developing country to come to the table. At the beginning, I was wondering why would the Development Bank attend a session on natural-based solution, but I think the answer is clear. If we want the private sector of our countries to come to the table and play their part, something needs to happen. And I'd like to differ a little bit with Dr. Rastogi. I don't think that there is a lot of liquidity in our countries available to our private sector at the kind of pricing and maturity that they need for it to be an incentive to actually invest in climate finance. I think liquidity and pricing is an issue in general, and it's even a bigger issue if we're asking the private sector to take additional risk on top of their normal risk to try new technologies or new ways of doing business that are more climate friendly. So if I have 1 minute, that would be my point. I think we need to relook at the type of liquidity that we avail to our private sector, the pricing, the maturity. And if we do that, there are clear areas of interest from our private sector. The first one would be around green cities, and I'm with the CEO of the Green Fund of Rwanda in the room. And together we're looking at a green city project to try to bring in the private sector and affect livelihood projects in Rwanda. The second one is around agroforestry. And I think if we're able to tackle this type of issues with the right liquidity, then we'll have made a major step forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great response and straightforward. I will move directly to Mr. Jackswar, who is the Acting Director for Environment and Officer in Charge, Department of Climate Change, and ask you about what Mauritius have been hosting the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. So what role do you think the CCFAH needs to play to advance NBS going forward? And you have like, let's say 1 minute, so I can actually make the conclusion because we are actually running behind the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator, Excellencies. Thank you for the invite. I think, yes, Mauritius is proud to host the hub. Of course, we believe the hub can play a very important role in helping in mobilizing resources very quickly. Mauritius is one of the vulnerable countries, of course, with a high level of endemism. Already government, already the NDC make mention about the, be it biodiversity, be it land degradation, be it, of course, for the climate change adaptation component. All these factor very high on the NDC. And of course, in terms of mechanism, the government is already investing massively with the National Environment Climate Change Fund. Now, what we are looking forward is with the new NDC, which is right there, an action plan which is going to be formulated. We are looking forward to the second term of the national advisor, at least to galvanize all the support and help us come up with bankable project. Already the government is coming with what is called a blue, green, and sustainable bond. The framework are being worked out. The governance structure are still to be developed. So I believe the financial advisor would have a key role to help us kind of move forward in the implementation. And of course,
thank you very much to all the panelists. As a conclusion, I would say, basically what is needed is capacity. and capacity to help countries to reduce risk, capacity to help them to build strong governance systems, actually, so to show that they are able to manage those funds perfectly and properly. And that's exactly what the climate financing hub of the Commonwealth have been trying to do with the help and support of its member states and other organizations. And I would like to thank you for your attention. We are really, I'm sorry, we have to rush because the time is off. We still have like 10 seconds and we are keeping the time. Thank you so much and good evening to all.